Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. So I did end up choosing, I guess, like the orange or tangerine sketchbook. So if you predicted correctly, do let me know. But we are going to be starting our first page, I guess. But before we hop in, let me show you the sketchbook a little bit more up close. So on the spine, we have like a little cute patterning with like some foliage and some tangerines or oranges just all the way down the spine. And then we have the back side, which I think is like my favorite part of the sketchbook because of the color combination especially. So there's a character on the back and it has like this blue or like kind of tealish color, turquoise, as well as this beautiful orange color. And then I always love their patterning and like their use of shapes. So if you're interested in the sketchbook, definitely check out Hello Today Coffee on Instagram, as well as their shops and portfolios and everything. They're definitely one of my favorite artists, so definitely check them out. But let's go ahead and open up this sketchbook. So upon entering, we are greeted with the sketch, which is going to be our first page in the sketchbook, but it's not the first page that I ended up working in, obviously. I like to do a little bit of planning. So on the back side of our cover page, I guess, I did end up doing some sketches of what I potentially wanted for the front inside cover as well as the back inside cover because I like making them match. And I was kind of thinking that I wanted to do Selwin, and I was already set on this as soon as I finished my other sketchbook, which I think some of you guys, or a lot of you guys, actually predicted who I was going to be drawing. So yes, I am drawing my OC Selwin for the inside cover of the sketchbook. So let me quickly talk about the process first, and then I'll jump in talking just generally about like sketchbooks, the reason why I picked this one in particular, and some like other miscellaneous things. But to start off, I did end up using the Color ENO as usual to do just kind of like a rough sketch. I don't think my sketch of Selwin is technically how I envision the front page. I kind of wanted his head to be tilted more and him leaning forward slightly so he's more like slouched and comfy. I'm also sticking my little painted coaster underneath my sketchbook cover just to keep everything leveled so it doesn't like slope downwards while I'm working. And then prepping the paper and my sketch for kind of like our cleaner sketch. So I went ahead with a kneaded eraser, lightened up my red kind of sketch underneath, and then we're going over with our mechanical pencil, which is just a normal HB lead, and going over and hopefully doing more cleaner lines. Because if you know, the Color ENO like colored leads typically are like, you know, they're not very light fast at all, as well as they dissolve in water. So I like to, you know, save myself a little bit of trouble by having some lines that won't budge, but I don't want to have too many sketchy lines or having too much loose graphite while painting. So doing my cleaner lines just with the kind of pencil just helps out a little bit easier in terms of like wanting to make sure things are going to be more or less kept clean during the painting phase, which I am going to be using gouache today, which might be a little bit shocking considering how much I low-key fight and like almost dislike gouache in a sense. But before we tackle that, I am going to be laying down some base colors and just like general colors for planning. And I like doing this with watercolors because mixing colors with watercolor is a little bit more easier for myself, and I can adjust things like with the transparency. And I'm just used to watercolors like more than gouache, so I feel more comfortable to use it for planning, where I feel like it's a little bit more crucial at this point. I'm also using like a more beat up brush just to lay down our colors fairly quickly. I'm not really worried about details as much as just trying to figure out my color palette and figure out what is what at this point. But I think similar to the one that I did for the last page of my previous sketchbook, I did want everything to have more of like a warmer tinge. So I am going to be going over the entirety of the sketch with a quick wash of kind of like a yellow, and then I'll make it a little bit more intense as we move downwards. I don't think it affects the final product too much, but it still is kind of like a good reminder for myself that I wanted to keep everything more or less warm when I'm painting with gouache. I don't think it comes like forward as much as I would have liked it, but part of me it was because like I was trying to keep to a certain color palette as well, so which you kind of see a little bit later. That Selwin has like kind of like a particular color palette in a sense, but I wanted to include some like lighter colors here and there, and I think I made Selwin like entirety a little bit darker than what I was anticipating, because I would have loved to have more softness in the overall piece just to give a more warmer, cozier vibe, but I think that's okay. But talking a little bit about the sketchbook, this one, in comparison to like my notebooks, kind of has like the opposite situation with the paper. So if you know, my previous sketchbooks, the ones that I usually design the covers for, are actually notebooks. So they often have thinner paper, like thinner notebook paper that's like fairly smooth, but it is indeed very thin. But the kind of page, I'm actually gonna look it up. I forget what it's called. Okay, if I'm reading this correctly, I think it's just an end paper or an end sheet. So it's the paper that kind of covers up the inside portion of the cover. So this is where like you would hide where the cover is like folding inwards, or like the design of it, if that makes sense. And then it has like a paper that extends off of it, because it is just one sheet of paper. So part of it is stuck to the back side, or like the inside portion of the cover, and then the rest of it is just like a loose leaf basically. But in my notebooks, it's a kind of thicker paper, and then the rest of them are thin paper on the inside. Well, this one's kind of the opposite, where this paper has much more of like, or the sketchbook has much more thicker paper, but the end paper is thinner. So I was a little bit worried about doing the painting portion, but luckily it took the watercolors pretty well. I did make sure to let it dry pretty much completely. There was a little bit of buckling here and there, but I tried my best to, you know, keep my binder clips in places that were able to help it kind of stretch out and not like curl as much. And hopefully, you know, that helped a little bit before we actually start to drench it even in more liquid, I guess, with the gouache painting portion. And speaking of gouache, we are on the gouache painting portion. So I am using the HIMI gouache as usual, and I'm not going to show you guys too much of a close-up of the paints as much as I did last time, since it's been just under a week of me using them, so I'm not too worried about mold or anything like that. I am going to rehydrate them because I do often kind of like let them dry a little bit while I work, and I don't really rehydrate them before putting them away. Maybe that's contributing to why I don't usually see any mold growth on any of my paints, while I hear like horror stories of other people having issues with their MIYA gouache kind of like getting mold. So I don't know what exactly is the root cause of it, because I hear some people have it and some people don't. So, you know, if you guys have any theories or speculation or more insight in general to why your palette molded compared to maybe other people, like did you leave your palette wet before closing it, all that, because I have done I think 3 times where I remixed the paint to revive them so that they have like the more creamy, silkier consistency rather than like a solid brick before reviving them, and I never really had any issues. Like I've never seen even like a spot of mold, to at least like from what I could see. But yeah, I don't know if that'll change in the future, but I've never had any issues thus far for having it for at least a few years at this point. So I'm kind of like safe to say that I'm not as frustrated with gouache as of painting the previous last page with Maseke. And I don't know if it's because I've been using more of like a flat square brush to do my initial kind of like painting and washes, and I find it just a little bit easier to apply paint in the way that I like. As soon as I switched it around, I do get a little bit more frustrated. So I don't know, maybe the flat brush I just find makes like a more even and smooth application that's like low-key a little bit more softer, because while I paint with like a round brush, I'm like making the paint really thick. I'm trying to use it to cover up large areas such as the hair, and then later on you'll see I'll do it for the clothing. But I feel like I should have just used the flat square brush to do the majority of my like laying down the base, because it works so well, at least for the skin for the most part. I could have done it for every other area, so at least it will look a little bit less patchy. And if it looks a little bit less patchy, maybe it will require me to cover up a little bit less, if that makes sense. But while I do the painting portion with the gouache, let me talk about the reasoning, I guess, choosing the sketchbook versus like maybe some of the other ones. Like I mentioned earlier, some people thought that I would choose the forget-me-not one. I did see someone think that maybe I'll choose the large one. I was hesitating. I did think that I would be nice to kind of have a break in between just constantly using my notebook over and over again, because I do end up in a place where I feel like I struggle to find mediums that I like with the paper and trying to find like workarounds for it. So I'm kind of like using the same technique or the same materials over and over again because I know I'll like the result a little bit better. And even though I have used multiple sketchbooks from this particular artist or of a similar artist who I think use the same manufacturer and have like very similar paper quality, there's just something about it where changing my sketchbook where the paper does differ does shift my mind a little bit towards how I kind of treat my sketches or drawing. Now, I hope that in this case, because my sketchbooks or like my notebooks technically are in theory free for myself because they were part of like a larger batch that I sell, and then usually the extra ones I keep for myself because usually they're the sample book. But I know like for the case where if you buy a more expensive sketchbook or one that has like higher quality paper or from an artist that you like, you might feel the pressure of, you know, I need to make everything in the sketchbook work out or like to make it look good. And I do struggle with that from time to time, but I think as I grow older, I've kind of let that go. Also, here's a quick tangent. I accidentally forgot to hit record when I was doing the hair portion because I took a break to go help my parents with something. And when I came back, I assumed I hit record, but I think I clicked the wrong button, so I ended up increasing the volume of my music because they're in the same spot. And by the time I realized that I didn't hit record, I did majority of the hair, which is kind of disappointing. So I do apologize that the majority of the hair painting process is not available. But kind of back to talking about sketchbooks. So for me, I know I'm able to kind of let go the fact that and a more expensive sketchbook doesn't mean like you have to do more high quality drawings in it per se. I do treat it with a little bit more preciousness in terms of at least wanting to like the content in the sketchbook, because yes, the main reason I buy these books is for the cover because it's made by the artist. Like sometimes even if it has like cheaper paper or something in it, I don't really mind because I'm paying more or less for the art. And to support the artist, and just having higher quality paper is nice for the price point obviously, but it's not my main reason of wanting to buy it in terms of like I don't want it just as like a showpiece. I know like a lot of people hoard sketchbooks, me included, but I do want to be able to have a sketchbook, and yes, its beautiful cover on the outside will entice me to just like, you know, I want to look at it and like admire it for like the colors or the illustration or whatever, but being able to look back on your drawings and having like fond memories of different art that you worked on, I think is a little bit more important for myself. So my other one where I worked in the hydrangea notebook, so the one that I made, my previous one, there are like a few pieces that I do like, but I actually don't know how often I'll reopen that sketchbook to look at the different drawings in it, if that makes sense, other than like for nostalgia's sake. There are like other ones that I will reopen because there's like an artwork or an art piece that I really like inside that sketchbook, which makes it a little bit sad to hear because I do believe that sketchbooks shouldn't be for, I guess, like pleasing other people visually. It should be like for creativity, for fun, for you to kind of like screw around and find out what works and what doesn't work, or like to test and do studies and like, you know, leave it as a mess, which, you know, is appealing for some other people as well, me included. But I don't know, my relationship with like sketchbooks and just like keeping up with them and like wanting to continue to draw on them or trying to build a sketchbook habit always changes. At this point, I think I've come to the realization that I'm going to accept that I'm not going to be able to have a sketchbook habit anymore, or at least like not one that will be like daily and consistently done. Because I think this year in particular has been one of the more busier years in terms of like social aspects. So even trying to find time to draw, I do spend it more drawing digitally than I do traditionally, even though I talked about this, that traditional art technically brings me a little bit more joy because I enjoy the process of it, even though the end result does become a little bit hit or miss and there's less leeway for me to fix it compared to digital. I still enjoy traditional like a lot compared to digital in a sense. So for this sketchbook, I do think that I'm going to see how I want to approach keeping a sketchbook. I don't think the drawings or the contents will particularly change because I do more or less draw whatever I like at the time, and I do draw more or less now to wind down or to kind of like plan for digital drawings or draw my OCs and silly little things where I feel like digital, I don't do as much of that anymore. So I don't know. I'll figure out how I want to approach the sketchbook for sure. I do want to get back in doing more colored, like I guess like water-based marker spreads or something like that, just because they were fun to do where I could focus just on one character and focus more on their design and trying to balance the values rather than like, you know, having to color match all the colors, especially for like Genshin characters, Honkai characters. They have, and like I guess VTubers as well, there's too many colors to consider, so having like a minimal color palette is always fun. But hopefully you guys will come join me in this new adventure in the sketchbook. Like I mentioned, I think in terms of like how I approach, or not how I approach, I guess like the mediums and stuff will be the same. I do like to mess around with like water-based markers, graphite, colored pencils, gouache, occasionally I guess, watercolors, and I don't know, a lot of different traditional mediums in the sketchbooks that I've been using in the past, so I don't think that's gonna change. But maybe I'll do more studies, or maybe I'll do like more full bodies, maybe I'll do more poses, maybe, I don't know. We'll see what happens. I'm excited to start a new sketchbook, that's for sure. And having done Selwin for the front cover in gouache does make me a little bit more compelled to do gouache in the future. So I'm hoping to ride that high a little bit for not disliking gouache at this moment, and maybe taking advantage of that and doing a few more pieces like this occasionally, because I do love how vibrant the colors are and how much they can stand out. So expect more gouache, I hope. I'm not jinxing myself, hopefully. I apologize that if that sounds kind of depressing. I don't want it to come off that way. It's just kind of me dumping my thoughts and feelings and seeing if I can process it a little bit. And unfortunately, you guys are here with me to witness that. But kind of like on a different note, but not on a complete tangent, since it's still on the topic of sketchbooks, is the artist that I bought this sketchbook from. So Hello Today Coffee, like I mentioned, is one of my favorite artists. And when I bought these two sketchbooks, this one and the very large one, I told myself like I would limit myself to buying two. There was a third one that I wanted to buy, but as soon as I purchased these ones, I think soon after they released a bunch of different square ones, and I just took a look at their portfolio and they had it on their website, and I'm so sad. There's like a very cute one. Maybe I'll put it on the screen. Okay, so now that I have them on the screen, there's like almost all of them that I really want. Especially like the green, the kind of like dark green solid one, and the one above it, and the one next to it, and the one next to that. There's too many. I'm gonna keep my eyes peeled when the next time they open their shop, because I'm super tempted just to even like stockpile on their sketchbooks specifically, because like I mentioned, one reason is like I really love their artwork, so I love having like a physical version of whatever art that they have, and they've always been so sweet whenever I had the chance to meet them in person at like an art convention and stuff, so I definitely want to continue to support them as much as I can. And then two, maybe it'll be a good time to have like a square sketchbook here or there every so often. I am a little bit like more hesitant to buy square sketchbooks, especially if they're on the smaller side, because I do find A5 sketchbooks to be small in general. So having a square sketchbook that typically is like 5.5 by 5.5, it feels even smaller. So, or it's not even that it feels even smaller, it is even smaller. So I want to be able to draw maybe more freely and larger. So smaller sketchbooks, square sketchbooks, not my favorite, but I do love their art, so maybe it's worth it. But enough about that. Let's talk about the drawing. So in the end, I did get a little bit frustrated in terms of trying to figure out how I wanted to do these little hanging stars. So I thought maybe the watercolor gave it enough color and a little bit of like halo glowy effect. So I ended up just going ahead, taking out my Magic Fly markers and using the fine liner side, choosing kind of an orange and just doing a quick outline, because I'm not confident in doing line art with gouache quite yet. And I could have done it in watercolor. That could have been also an option, but I didn't really want to see how it feathers on the paper too much. Also, this might look a little bit strange that I'm just kind of putting in the drop shadow when you can't really see the text right away. So yeah, I ended up putting kind of like a very muted light green as the shadow and then blending it out with the colorless blender. I'm using alcohol markers for the text, as I've been doing for the last few sketchbooks, I believe, and writing in hello. I'm not super confident in doing like calligraphy, even though I did it in high school for a bit, so I couldn't handwrite it all the way through, being able to do like the thick and the thins, but you know, do your best to break it up. And then I went in with our darker color to kind of correlate back to Selwin's warmer orange reddish color that he has in his outfit. And then I still wanted to have the yellow, which is present in like the little accessories he has, and the yellow overall from like the little stars everywhere. And hopefully the green, which doesn't show up too well on the camera. I wanted it to be similar to a little bit of like the musty teal green gray color, both one on the cover of the sketchbook, but as well as like a little bit in kind of like the warmer areas of his blanket. Oh, also, if you're not familiar with Selwin, he actually has a cardigan more similar to the color of his blanket. It's not quite like an orange, it's a very light cream color with kind of like orangey or darker beige line patterning on it. But I decided that it would be a little bit too warm to have his sweater and a cardigan and a blanket, and I didn't really want to think of a blanket color or pattern to make it kind of more cohesive, so I decided to change the blanket to be the same style of his cardigan to kind of keep the color palette the same for his character throughout. And I think that's it. That's pretty much the entire painting session, alongside with just talking about the general vibe and stuff about the sketchbook, alongside with, I do think it kind of resembles this one of Akemi just a smidge. I do apologize to the person who wanted me to do Akemi. I did end up picking Selwin, but it was kind of already set in stone since the very beginning for me. Ooh, I didn't talk about it at all, but I do think the last page of the sketchbook will be this kind of version of him, but sleeping. But yeah, I think that's it for today's video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed watching me paint, and I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye!